Innovativ.
Holistic.
Ästhetika.
Free thinking.
Chaotisch.
Honest.
Revolutionary.
White.
Radikal.
Fast. German.
That is Bauhaus.
After 100 years, the ideals of the Bauhaus are more relevant today than they were then.
100 years ago, Bauhaus reimagined the future.
How will we learn? How will we live?
The Bauhaus influence is everywhere.
Bauhaus set out to formulate a language of design that was universal.
That everything has an ideal height, an ideal size, and that's what optimizes its utility.
You know, they wanted to kind of bridge the gap from whether you're a craftsman or whether you're a designer or whether you're an artist.
Bauhaus is a legend. The brilliance of the Bauhaus school remains undiminished even today. Even though its existence was short-lived, it continues to shape the world we live in. New approaches to education and training, architecture, painting, dance and design were explored and developed here. When Hitler seized power and forced the school to shut down, its artists, architects and visionaries emigrated, fanning out and spreading the Bauhaus doctrine around the world. So can we still feel the Bauhaus effect today? Serial production of everyday goods was a cornerstone of the Bauhaus vision, a partnership between design and industry. At the furniture retailer IKEA, that vision seems to have become reality. Eva Maria Runegard knows exactly what consumers want.
How can you have your first home and your first bed, your first sofa, your first desk actually accessible at a price that you can afford?
Affordability is the linchpin of the company's business model. IKEA was founded in 1943. Generations have grown up with its designs. So is IKEA the Bauhaus of today? Is it exactly what Bauhaus founder Walter Gropius envisaged a century ago?
We have a tool that we call democratic design, and that tool has 5 dimensions, starting with form. A connection to Bauhaus, as we are talking about today, is of course that form follows function. It needs to be at a good quality for what it's the intended use. We work very heavily with sustainability. And when you take all of those 4 together with a low price, that's when you have a typical IKEA product.
The 5 pillars of democratic design, as formulated by IKEA founder Ingvar Kamprad. He wanted everyone to be able to afford well-made products. So did Walter Gropius, the first Bauhaus director. In Weimar, he proposed that art, craft and industry collaborate to make consumer products more available to the common man. Weimar was a conservative place, and the Bauhaus school was eventually forced to move. It relocated to Dessau, which proved a far better fit.
Weimar didn't want the Bauhaus, and in 1925, Gropius had to look for an alternative site. Dessau seemed to be the best option. There were plenty of opportunities for the school to flourish there. Politics and industry had vested interests in the Bauhaus moving to Dessau. At the time, the region was similar to Silicon Valley today, if you will.
In Dessau, the school joined forces with a number of industrial partners. Inspired by series production, the Bauhaus began exploring synergies between art and technology.
In total, Bauhaus partnered here in Dessau with thousands of firms to work on various projects, both large and small. There were very close ties between the school and industry. Lots of people commissioned the Bauhausers to design fittings for their homes, to design brochures for their companies. But of course, there were plenty of raised eyebrows too. And eventually, they had to move on once again.
Against the backdrop of the Great Depression, the liberal Bauhaus school came under increasing pressure. In 1928, tired of facing constant hostility, director Walter Gropius appointed a successor. With Swiss architect Hannes Meyer at the helm, the Bauhaus focused even more heavily on industry and also became more political.
Hannes Meyer moved the Bauhaus in a very socialist direction, communist even. In the extremely productive 2 years that he was director, this played a major role, which was very different from the Gropius era.
The Bauhaus set out to design and manufacture well-made products for everyone. Catering to everyday needs took priority over artistic considerations.
They wanted to reach households, homes, society in general, and with products that looked completely unlike anything that had existed before. There was a turning point after the First World War. By 1922 or 1923 at the latest, everyone was excited about mechanization and industrial production. There was a consensus that in the post-war era, people should be modern and welcome technology and progress. And this should be reflected in everyday products, from carpets to houses to the urban environment. And they were to do this so as to modernize the city and indeed the world.
IKEA's ultimate goal is no different. Just like the Bauhaus, the retailer sees itself as a kind of laboratory for a better everyday life.
We want to create a better everyday life for the many people, which in one way as a philosophy is very similar to the thinking of Bauhaus, that design should not be for the few. Good products should be for the many.
For IKEA, the many are first and foremost consumers. Ultimately, it wants to sell products. The Bauhaus effect is unmistakable. IKEA's democratic design is by definition mass-produced. The retailer has adapted the core Bauhaus philosophy to today's consumer society. Hannes Meyer was the Bauhaus director for just 2 years. In 1930, the town council dismissed him for communist sympathies. Along with some former students, he went to the Soviet Union to help build the fledgling state. The Second World War tore Germany into two. Weimar and Dessau ended up in communist East Germany.
There was no scope for Bauhaus to be revived in the early years of communist East Germany. It was rejected as a bourgeois institution. That was the attitude until well after the death of Stalin, basically until the early 1960s and the rise of architectural functionalism, when urban planners began erecting prefab houses in estates on the outskirts of cities. At that point, Bauhaus was re-evaluated and once again seen as a good thing.
Hannes Meyer's legacy was politicized design and the famous slogan Volksbedarf statt Luxusbedarf, the needs of the people instead of the need for luxury. Today, Bauhaus-designed products are expensive. Only the well-off can afford them. Such as Wilhelm Wagenfeld's table lamp. It's now a classic.
The Wagenfeld table lamp costs around 400 euros. That's because it was designed and manufactured at the Bauhaus school before serial production had really taken off. Even at the time, the Wagenfeld lamp was so expensive that it didn't sell very well.
Without series production, the Wagenfeld lamp could only remain a luxury item. But the lamp did cross the Atlantic. The Museum of Modern Art in New York City has one in its collection. In the late 1920s, MoMA's founding director Alfred Barr helped introduce Americans to the Bauhaus. Swiss-born Martino Stierli is MoMA's chief curator of architecture and design.
From very early on, Alfred Barr was keen on Bauhaus and the European avant-garde in general. What he especially liked about Bauhaus was its push to incorporate art into everyday life. Also its merging of art and technology, and its interdisciplinary approach, and its aim of making the arts non-hierarchical. Alfred Barr took these principles, these basic Bauhaus concepts, and worked them into the founding structure of the Museum of Modern Art.
Thus, Bauhaus serves as the foundation of one of the world's foremost art collections.
Bauhaus stands for a very particular aesthetic, but at the same time, the Bauhaus is quite a vague term. Anything that counts as modernist design in the broadest sense very quickly finds itself being described as Bauhaus, in a rather reductive fashion. It's also a way of signaling your own stylistic preferences. Perhaps that's problematic, but of course it's also symptomatic of an extraordinary success. If you've become a brand, you've really made it.
Well, the Bauhaus is like a virus. So it spreads more quickly than you realize. What if nothing interesting ever happened at the Bauhaus, but they had an amazing publicity machinery, books, magazines, personalities? But was this all just kind of creating a kind of cult? So maybe Bauhaus is not about rationality, it's not about industrialization, it's not about clarity in the machine age and so on. Gropius, he's a hardcore expressionist at the beginning of Bauhaus moments. He becomes a kind of a manager. Is it management culture that spread? We are surrounded here by the effects of this virus, and we are in the center of management culture. This is New York Management Central.
Architecture critic Mark Wigley lives in New York, but finds the glass and steel oppressive. Has the name Bauhaus simply become a catch-all label, devoid of real substance? Bauhaus is now a brand, instantly recognizable. Perhaps that's why it's such an enduring favorite. Especially for connoisseurs of design and architecture, like the Ehlers.
You'd think it was newly built. People are always asking us about it. We stumbled across the house completely by chance. It was advertised in a Wiesbaden bank as a bungalow in need of renovation in a prime location. And I said to my wife, that sounds interesting. Let's take a look.
What the Ehlers found was a piece of architectural history. Not even the estate agent was aware that the bungalow was the last surviving house in Germany designed by Bauhaus architect Marcel Breuer.
We sensed immediately that there was something special about it. It hadn't been touched for years, and honestly, it was in terrible condition. But somehow, you could still sense the spirit of Breuer. Breuer positioned the eaves and the ledges under the windows so that sunlight refracts below the windows and there's never any direct sunlight in the rooms. He left nothing to chance. Everything has been meticulously thought through. It's absolutely fascinating. You can't help but be seduced. You have to give it to him. Hats off, respect. These days you don't see many elements like these in houses anymore. The cubist look has become very popular again. There's lots of new houses and they're very nice. But back then they put a lot more thought into what it would actually be like to live in these houses.
Usually architects take cues from their clients, but here the owners took their cues from Bauhaus-inspired furnishings. In the late 1920s, Marcel Breuer designed this chair for the Tornet company. The marriage of art and industry had become reality.
These are matching items of garden furniture. They're not only comfortable, they also look amazing. Lots of tubular steel, very light, white, very sleek.
The couple had previously only been familiar with Breuer, the furniture designer, but now they've inadvertently become guardians of his architectural legacy.
We went to Berlin, to Weimar and Dessau and really studied the Bauhaus philosophy. We learnt a lot. We felt it was important we understood more about it if we were going to live in this house.
What immediately strikes you is that the functional rooms face north, and the rooms you actually spend time in face south. So the house has a very positive energy.
Of course, not everyone has their own private Bauhaus museum, but they can always make a pilgrimage to the Vitra Design Museum in Weil am Rhein. Herzog and de Meuron, Frank Gehry, Zaha Hadid and many other contemporary architects have left their mark here. For museum director Matteo Klee, architecture and design are central to the human experience.
Design is basically a way of solving a problem, an opportunity to tackle everyday problems with creative ideas. That can involve furniture, but it can also involve processes and social situations. There's much more to design than making products. Designers also address questions to do with society, new materials, and with things that are not always tangible. That's an understanding of design that has its roots in Bauhaus. The school was one of the first institutions propagating a wide-ranging understanding of design that went beyond individual objects. To the Bauhauser, design was a way of shaping society and the future.
The museum's collection has some 7,000 exhibits, including many iconic examples of international product design. There are famous pieces by Marcel Breuer and, of course, Mies van der Rohe.
Mies van der Rohe hatte eben auch diese großbürgerliche, etwas glamouröse Seite.
There was a very upper-class, glamorous side to Mies van der Rohe. Modernist architecture doesn't always have to be austere. It's not always white walls and simple, small window frames. It can be flamboyant, too, as Mies demonstrated with his Barcelona pavilion, and also with the furniture he designed for it. His Barcelona chair exudes the same glamour and grandeur as the pavilion itself. You think that Mies was a straightforward person? No. So people who obsess about getting everything in the right place, everything, so very, very directly from what seems like a human project, let's figure out the dimensions of the human body, let's organize a system to take care of that body. Soon it's like, let's make a new body. Let's make architecture and furniture and equipment that shapes a new human. Then it's like, let's make a superhuman. You could never imagine that such an obsessive building came from a straightforward person.
He's talking about Mies van der Rohe's Seagram building, a steel, skeleton-framed tower featuring dark glass and bronze beams. Built in the late 1950s, it helped usher in a new era of sleek, elegant skyscrapers. Facades with no structural function, an idea that Mies van der Rohe had perfected in Chicago. Minimalist, pared-down buildings, often fronted by a plaza.
So what if we say the opposite? Straightforward buildings are made by crazy people, right? And crazy people are often the people that really affect us. Have we ever been affected by somebody that's nice? So what if Bauhaus was not nice?
I've got 45.8 square meters. The other apartments are about the same size. Luxury. I'm not going anywhere.
Kerstin Franz loves her compact little apartment in Dessau. She doesn't think it's the least bit austere or soulless.
I can see every change in the weather, every mood through my windows. It's lovely. You usually only see windows this size in shop fronts. I have a shop window onto a park. I love it. It's wonderful at every time of the year, especially in winter. When it snows, it glows in here. Magical. When there's a full moon, moonlight floods through the windows. It's a permanent light show just for me.
Designed by Hannes Meyer in 1929, the world-famous Laubengang houses were extraordinarily innovative and progressive for the time. The affordable housing project was a perfect example of his guiding principle, that architecture has a social responsibility.
It was for all social classes, merchants, shoemakers, metalworkers. Just think of how most people lived in Berlin in the 1920s and 30s. And look how light this apartment is. Imagine how it must have felt to people with low incomes. It was sensational. And just for me.
Unplastered brick, exposed lintels made of reinforced concrete, aesthetically Hannes Meyer's design marked a break from Bauhaus conventions. One of the standout features is the Communal Walkway.
It's different from a standard new building, which would just have a normal hallway. Here you're immediately outside. And that means there's a very different sense of community. There'll be someone outside having a smoke or sitting there and people watching. So of course you say hello and maybe have a chat. There's no social cohesion in Germany these days. There's no one like Hannes Meyer or Walter Gropius with ideas and a vision that they know how to put into action.
The Laubengang houses were the continuation of the urban planning agenda formulated by Walter Gropius. The Bauhaus in Dessau set out to build inexpensive housing to address the shortage in the wake of the First World War.
It was a considerable challenge because Gropius's housing estate was also an economic model. He designed terraced homes that were relatively small by today's standards, but he planned for lots of them. He made it possible for workers to live in a proper house. And what's even more extraordinary is that these houses are still lived in today.
I'm something of a curiosity here. They all see me as a crazy professor, the one who did up the Bauhaus building. It started out as an experiment to see if it was possible. Is it possible today in the early 21st century to live comfortably in a Bauhaus building which has limited space?
It is possible, although it does require certain compromises.
The bed is in the wrong place. Gropius planned it to be the other way around, but his bed was only 1 meter by 80. So with a bed that's 2 by 2, the wall's a problem. The other way around would be better. Then you could have bedside tables on both sides.
Hans Knut Arndt is a die-hard Bauhaus aficionado. His home here on the estate designed by Walter Gropius is his castle.
I'm having a new garage added. It was really hard to find one that suited the house, but then I'm obsessed with Bauhaus, well, an enthusiast. I wanted something very specific. Fortunately, I had something to go by. The Gropius master's house still has an intact garage, so I used that as my inspiration. It was hard, but I found a company that could build it for me with pumice concrete, which is even eco-friendly, and make something that will look very Bauhaus.
Gropius strove for efficient solutions. He tested out new building materials and prefabricated parts that could be made in series production. The construction site was like an industrial production line, with several houses under construction at once. The limited budgets called for ingenious architectural solutions.
Here, behind the shower curtain, was the way to the roof terrace. Because of the shortage of space, the way to the roof terrace was through the bathroom. I imagine the thinking was that all the rooms up here are bedrooms, and that the bathroom is the only room that everyone uses. So it's a good place to put the access to the balcony or the terrace.
Hans Knut Arndt is one of the few residents of the estate whose home still looks just as it did in Gropius's day. While the other houses are examples of what one might call Bauhaus kitsch. In 1938, the global spread of Bauhaus was given a major boost in New York, with an exhibition at MoMA showcasing its work.
It's almost impossible to overstate the influence of Bauhaus in US art schools after 1940. It was the foundation for generations of artists. Walter Gropius was appointed chair of the Department of Architecture at the Harvard University Graduate School of Design, one of the most prestigious architecture departments in the country. Mies van der Rohe went to the Armour Institute, which became the Illinois Institute of Technology. He not only designed the new university campus, he changed the way that architecture was taught.
The Bauhaus is impossibly important. Like, it's just, for us to discuss design without talking about the Bauhaus is like talking about cooking without talking about fire, right? It just makes no sense. And for that reason, we can't get the Bauhaus out of our bodies or out of our thoughts. But that doesn't mean that the people who invented it knew what they were doing. I feel like whenever you open your cell phone, you put on some clothes, you go out the door, whenever you read, the typography of what you read, everything you see, almost everything you see is Bauhaus shaped and packaged. And that means we are the victims of the Bauhaus.
When the Nazis came to power, many former Bauhaus students and teachers emigrated to the US. In the 1950s and 60s, the movement's principles became the backbone of American modernism.
Anni und Josef Albers werden in den 30er Jahren.
In the 1930s, Anni and Josef Albers were invited to teach at Black Mountain College in North Carolina. In the 1950s, it became a chrysalis for many extraordinarily important artists. Many of the people who played influential roles in post-war American art were affiliated with schools that had picked up the mantle of Bauhaus. Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, Merce Cunningham.
Robert Rauschenberg, Jasper Johns, Merce Cunningham.
Choreographer Merce Cunningham, who taught at Black Mountain, explored the ideas of movement developed in the Bauhaus stage workshop.
Seeing where art has gone, the Bauhaus movement does cross over into the dance, into the music. A 5, a 6, a ready, go.
In New York, dancer Jennifer Goggins ensures the legend of Merce Cunningham lives on.
Merce Cunningham radically changed the art form of dance. One of the first things he did was to create works that were devoid of plot. So there were no more characters, no more stories, and he was interested in looking at dance and movement for movement's sake.
His radical approach made him a natural heir to Oskar Schlemmer, the defining force of the Bauhaus stage workshop. Centered on the theme of figures in space, his work turned dancers into costumed geometrical shapes, exploring the idea of the human body as a mechanical object. The Triadic Ballet, which premiered in 1922 in Stuttgart, is still performed today. Oskar Schlemmer's experimentation informed the work of Merce Cunningham.
People would say the dance isn't human because there's no character, you're not expressing some emotion. And Merce would say dance is always human because it is performed by the human body. This was extremely radical, and today, dance choreographers all over, they work in a very abstract way, and that's accepted. Steady in the leg. There we go. Big lunge.
The Bauhaus tradition was also fostered in post-war West Germany, at the Ulm School of Design, the HFG.
The initial idea was to revive the Bauhaus. Many former Bauhausers taught here, like Max Bill, the co-founder and its first director.
Today, the Ulm premises serve as an exhibition space. Until its closure in 1968, the HFG was one of the most seminal art and design schools in Germany. What came to be known as the Ulm model reconfigured the role of the designer. Even in the early days, the Ulm School of Design collaborated closely with partners in industry. One of its most successful partnerships was with the Brown Electric Company.
The arrangement of the elements is very Bauhaus. It harks back to the constructivist graphic design used by Bauhaus. It's in that tradition. The Phono Super SK4, known as Snow White's coffin, was commissioned by Brown. The Ulm School of Design took these commissions as a way of raising money for the school.
Fong Vu is head designer at Brown. He's meeting with the Brown Collection's archivist, Thomas Guttandin.
The proportions are key, very slim.
The proportions come from Dieter Rams.
Dieter Rams was appointed head of Braun's newly minted design department in the early 1960s. Together with the Ulm Design School, he developed a number of products that are now classics. Interdisciplinary teamwork was crucial to the creative process.
Der Schneewittchensarg ist so ein Beispiel.
The Phonosuper SK4 is an example of a product made by a team of people sitting round a table and all chipping in. The result was a product that's iconic. It was improved upon step by step, and at one point Dieter Rams suggested the plexiglass hood. The turntable was designed by Wagenfeld.
Wilhelm Wagenfeld was a former Bauhaus student. A new design language traced its lineage from the Bauhaus to Ulm and then to Braun, ending up in households all over the world. Braun will forever be associated with industrial designer Dieter Rams. He brought a new simplicity and style to everyday objects.
When is it too much or too little? What makes a product user-friendly? When is it too stylish?
The very same questions that preoccupied the Bauhaus school.
Braun was well known for pared-down design in just one category, hi-fis, as we see here. In global terms, the brand wasn't well known. So step number 2 was to translate this new design philosophy into the realm of the household. It was with household appliances that the Braun brand crossed the Atlantic. In America, they were instantly recognized as examples of timeless design.
Dass das ein zeitloses Design ist.
Die Firma Braun hat in der Nachkriegszeit.
In the post-war era, Braun was very successful in establishing a very high-end corporate design, a corporate identity, if you will.
Oder eine corporate identity herzustellen über.
It's known for contemporary and functional design, and Dieter Rams was instrumental in that process.
Dieter Rams elementar war.
Today, the world's leading tech companies continue to be inspired by the classic 1960s and 70s Braun aesthetic. An aesthetic that lives on in Apple's iPod and iPhone. A first-generation iPod which references the Braun T3 pocket radio. Apple's chief designer, Johnny Ive, acknowledges the debt and presented Dieter Rams with an iPod in return. While Bauhaus propagated a union of art, craft and technology, Braun and Apple represent a union of art, commercialism and consumption, a sign of the times. The minimalist, almost modest look of their products is well suited to the digital age. In today's highly individualized society, the design of the products we buy is an expression of our identity.
What's modest about Bauhaus objects? I think it's fake modesty. That's fake news. Your iPhone, right? This is a perfect Bauhaus object. In fact, Steve Jobs went to a lecture of somebody from the new Bauhaus and said, okay, I totally love the principles of Bauhaus. So we always carry Bauhaus in our pocket. Don't you think that somebody with the latest phone feels more human rather than less? They don't just feel fashionable. It's not just about keeping up with the fashion, it's about not falling behind, still being fully able to connect. When the human is the most designed thing there is, now we better get a new concept of design, right? Because it's just fine to have an iPhone. It's not so fine to be an iPhone.
The unity of art and technology developed in Dessau, joined to Hannes Meyer's focus on the needs of the people, Together, they yield good design for everyday objects. That is the Bauhaus effect. The basic tenets of Bauhaus have been passed on through its successors and have travelled around the world. The unity of art and technology has been superseded by the unity of art and commerce. Bauhaus as a brand, a lifestyle.
All that's great until you realize that you yourself, your emotions, your feelings, your thoughts, your body, your genetics, your children, your way of life, the sky, the weather. Now we have designed the weather. We have designed our own extinction. Now you realize that Bauhaus design, good design, has brought us to the very end of the destruction of our species, right? At that moment, before we kill ourselves, let's kill the Bauhaus.
Or we keep posing questions.
The reason why Bauhaus is still interesting today is that it raised interesting, very fundamental questions. How do we want to live in the future? That's most definitely one reason why Bauhaus still has such appeal.
Does Bauhaus still have something to teach us? Who are we now, and what are our needs? Can good design still improve people's everyday lives? We'll find out in the third and last part of the series, Bauhaus World, the Utopia.